On today's World Insight, fresh round of trade negotiations in Stockholm between China and the U.S. What do indicators tell us about how talks could be shaping up? What's at stake?
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. High-level delegations from China and the U.S. meet on second day of a new round of trade talks in Swedish capital Stockholm. Negotiations between the world's two biggest economies seek to fix long-time trade issues amid the Trump administration's tariff war. This is the third round of these talks. The first two were held, as you know, in Geneva and London, where a consensus was reached on a bilateral economic consultation mechanism. So what could we expect from the ongoing China-U.S. negotiations, and what tangible impact will these talks have on the world's economy? Let's loop in our panelists. We have in Tokyo, Japan, Yan Liang, Creamer Chair, Professor of Economics from Willamette University. In Shanghai, Manu Menendez, Chairman and CEO of MCM Group Holdings. In Washington, D.C., Surab Gupta from the Institute for China-American Studies. Last but not least, in Beijing studio with me, Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Taihe Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to have a strong panel like you joining us for this very important moment. Now, we are hearing from both sides expectations. Quote, the U.S. trade representative right before the meeting suggesting continued monitoring and checking in on the implementation of our agreements thus far. That's the U.S. expectation for this round. Meanwhile, we also heard from the Chinese Ministry of Commerce talking about following up the spirit of consensus on the June the 5th phone call between the two presidents. Now, to you, Professor Liang, what can we expect? Too much or not too much?
Yeah, good to be with you, Tian Wei. So I think what is interesting is coming to these trade negotiations, both sides believe that they're in a strong point. The United States just concluded trade negotiations with Japan and EU and claimed victory in both negotiations. On the other hand, China was able to achieve really high growth rate in the first half of the year, and trade has contributed to 1.3 percentage points to the GDP growth rate. So I think China thinks that, they also have a strong position to come into the negotiations. So I think negotiations now would really, from China's perspective, focus on reducing the tariff, because right now the U.S. is still imposing 55% tariffs with the 30% newly added tariffs with 10% reciprocal and 20% fentanyl related tariffs. So I think from China's perspective, that 20% fentanyl related tariff could really have a large room to go down. When you look at the baseline, the U.S. has a tariff with Japan and EU with 15%. And from the U.S. perspective, I think they really wanted to open up China's market, sell more, agricultural products, energies, and other products to China. They would also like to get some deals on TikTok, as well as in the recent, talks, Desmond talked about fixing China's, so-called overcapacity issues, and also take issue with China's purchases of Russian oil. So I think those are thorny issues that I don't see the point for China to cave in.
Of course, a very limited time, Mr. Menendez. As a business person, I'm sure you understand this. Within the limited time frame, would many lists on the U.S. side and some lists on the Chinese side be able to be achieved?
I think this time I'm cautiously optimistic that there's going to be a mixed bag, where I think that there'll be, again, a pause, maybe a 90-day pause. But I think in sector-specific areas, I think we're going to see some progress. That's why I'm cautiously optimistic. And that would be in things that are non-controversial, like agricultural sector type of activities.
Interesting.
So that's what I'm hoping that there'll be enough momentum after Geneva, London, now we're Stockholm. So the frequency that we've talked about before on your show, frequency and having face-to-face meetings, that's happening. And that's really positive, and that's really good.
I really want to follow up with what you just said, because during the Chinese Commerce Ministry spokesperson's earlier interactions, by the way, this is almost like a week ago, before the negotiations, talking about take great advantage of the already existing consultation mechanism, end of quote. Now, to you, Mr. Tangen, that seems to be to make sure this mechanism will continue to work and can bring the two sides closer on various issues? What can you expect?
Well, remember, the larger picture here is Donald Trump is negotiating with other nations to determine how much the American consumers are going to pay in a very regressive tariff scheme. So at this point, both sides feel that time is on their side. Donald Trump is concerned about the reaction of his base. They do not like inflation. And from the Chinese side, they're going to be dealing with Donald Trump for 3.5 years. And they're also anxious to see exactly what the base in America feels about this.
Right. Mr. Gupta, you've been putting a lot of your time for China-U.S. relations, geopolitically, for example. Now, we heard earlier there were, in the media reports at least, the U.S. side talking about the expected, meeting between the two presidents. And later, there is not that much news about that anymore. We do not know when and how and on what occasion that will happen. But the question really is, to what extent do you think a foundation needs to be established between the two top leaders would meet one another? What should be enough mutual respect, as China usually put it?
Well, I think it's very, very important that they meet and they meet early. And I am hoping that one of the most important deliverables coming out of this meeting in Stockholm is the two sides getting an understanding when their presidents will actually meet. I think a very good timing to meet would be just prior to the APEC summit in late October. South Korea is hosting the APEC summit. Mr. Trump can be coming to either Beijing or Shanghai just prior to APEC. He says he's coming with a big delegation. That's a good moment. And I think the important thing right now at this point of time is to kind of ensconce this trade and economic framework so that we can have deliverables ready for that late October meeting. And those deliverables will fundamentally be on very significant market purchases.
Okay.
And in the meantime, the States will reduce its tariffs and won't have more export controls.
We're going to see about what's likely to happen. Having said that, though, all of you seem to mention the U.S. Washington claimed the victory about the trade negotiations with Japan, with the EU, even though we have been hearing some different voices. For example, after the deal, quote unquote, was announced by the European Commission president together with the U.S. president, we have heard through media reports France has denounced it as a submission to the U.S. Meanwhile, Germany, one of the largest economies in Europe, talking about significant danger, end of quote. So earlier we also heard from the U.S. Talking about its deal with Japan, but we haven't heard all the details. And though the details are not necessarily being signed into papers, which means it could change at any moment. It's not likely to be handled just by a presser. So having said that, though, it's very interesting that right before China-U.S. talks, these news coming out, whether you could say as congratulatory or as pressure toward the China-U.S. discussions. Manny, you're a business person. You know the strategy of negotiations, I guess, better than I do. How much would this help? How conscious do you think China is and U.S. is about how many cars they have on hand, how much leverage they have, and how much consensus they can have together?
Yeah, it's China is a different ballgame completely.
Explain,
China,
please.
I mean, China is not going to bend to any kind of resistance. I think it has to be on the basis of mutual respect, like you've talked about before. And also, China's part of global trade is 15% to the United States. 85% is the rest of the world. So I think both have very strong positions. That's why that's the number one and number two economy. But they both actually working together will make the world more stable. The world markets are not stable. We have uncertainty and not predictability. And I think going back to your comment on the EU and Japan, I think they look at it from a perspective, at least for now, they have some predictability and some stability, and that really will help from a business perspective going forward. Is it the ideal arrangement? Absolutely not.
Right.
But at least they have a deal, and I think that's where they're coming from.
They have a deal according to the presser. but not necessarily on paper. So whether that's a deal or not a deal, well, still has to be tested at that time.
The devil, as I say, the devil's in the details.
Absolutely, you know that very well. Yeah, and to you as well, we understand not only Japan and EU not put things on the paper yet, not to mention implementation, but also U.S. has yet to reach deals with Canada, Mexico, India, South Korea, just to name a few examples. And at the same time, the White House has been talking about putting out letters about 15 to 20% tariffs against other economies that not necessarily negotiated with the U.S. yet. Well, these are all coming from the U.S. side. So there are a lot of uncertainties. A lot of factors are still moving very fast as we speak when the Chinese and the U.S. negotiators are sitting face to face right now.
Absolutely. Well, I think, first of all, I think Donald Trump likes big numbers. And so I think EU and Japan both give him all these big numbers, right? $550 billion investments promised by Japan and $600 billion from EU. But Japan also made it clear, out of this $550 billion pledged investment, only 1 to 2% are actually investments. The rest are loans. And also, when you think about, the 15% on automobiles on EU's cars, it sounded like a big loss for EU's market. But at the same time, let's not forget, the US is imposing 25% tariff on cars for Canada and Mexico, which means the supply chain of the automobile production in North America will be hurt. And so that, in a way, would it indirectly elevate actually the automobiles competitiveness of the EU. So I think there are a lot of details in those deals, the so-called deals. They're not necessarily in favor of the United States as much as Donald Trump would like to claim. At the same time, I also would agree that China is not playing the same kind of game as EU or Japan, right? Those two are in some ways really caving in, at least in paper, to the United States, giving all these big numbers that Donald Trump likes to listen. But I think China is playing a very different role and different game here because China is coming into this negotiation from a position of strength.
I would love to borrow that word, actually, position of strength. As we know, that phrase was earlier quite a hot phrase between China and the United States just a few years ago when the trade war started. Having said that, though, to you, Einar, we see that there are things that China is really strongly willing to work with the United States. And also, if you look at the latest report put out by IMF, looking at the prospect of growth of the global economy. And here I quote, precarious global backdrop is still hurting the growth of the global economy, especially according to the IMF report lately, the danger of tariff war and trade war. So how much do you think with this backdrop, U.S. and China can come together? What do you think, since you're living here in China, Einar, how do the negotiators, how does their mentality from China works in terms of China's role vis-a-vis the United States and also China's role globally in this, what U.S. started as the tariff war against everybody else?
I think it's pretty simple. I mean, Washington is working on an extractive model. They put these tariffs not just against China, but against, now he's going to expand it to 200 countries. I wonder if the penguins are still going to be included. China has a different perspective. You look at the Belt and Road Initiative, it is about a common prosperity, and it's about multilateralism. So you couldn't have two more different outlooks. China believes that it's being the adult in the room. Washington thinks that it's being a clever pragmatist.
Mr. Gupta, your thoughts on this? Both sides have a lot on their minds, but as to what is their ultimate goal, it seems to be quite different, even when it comes to words.
I think at this point, at least in the short and medium term, there is a congruence of interest. And that congruence of interest is, as we've seen with Donald Trump, he wants huge targeted market purchase agreements. He's tried to do that with the EU and Japan. He can get something far, far better from China. From China's end, China wants an interdependent relationship with the US and with this president, because he is president for the next 3.5 years, to stabilize the relationship. And that, I think, can be a foundation, a stepping stone for a more stable relationship going forward.
Very interesting. We understand earlier stated many times the White House wanted to charge tariffs on imported goods in order to protect the U.S. manufacturing. But if you look at some of the numbers closely, the largest part of the American economy is in the service sector. Take a look at this graphic. About 79% of U.S. workforce is in the service sector. Manufacturing only accounts for 8%. And by the way, all the imports into the United States, much of them are coming from manufacturing, not necessarily from the service sector. U.S. is probably one of the biggest winners of service trade worldwide, as stated earlier by the World Trade Organization as well. So with that, quite a clear picture, Manny, how much do you think the latest rounds talks with China would add, glory to the current White House back at home without reaching a real deal with China on paper? How much the current administration will have to shoulder the pressure leading up to the next midterm election? Even though I'm thinking about quite a long time, because now politics is only 1 week or two. But anyway, I'm thinking about 2 years. Okay, go ahead, Manny.
It's a difficult question because the real challenge in the U.S. and the current administration is that it's a moving target. One day there's one thought, the next day there's another thought. And I think bringing back manufacturing, when I talk to people in the U.S., it's bringing back manufacturing to the U.S. is part of the Trump administration's priority. But what I talk about is bringing back jobs of the future, jobs that are going to be future jobs, future industries, not jobs of the past, because that's not going to happen. As you pointed out, 80% of our economy is service industry and 8% is manufacturing. So, focusing on bringing manufacturing back at certain types of manufacturing. So I don't know if I've answered the question, but it's a complicated matter because it's a moving target.
You answered the question in a very unique way, and by the way, very polite way, but I try to read behind what you're trying to suggest, Manny. But to you, Yan, same question. How much a deal with China is really needed by the current White House? What does it mean for Washington?
Well, first of all, I think bringing back manufacturing jobs is really a false narrative because even if manufacturing sort of goes back to the United States or revitalized in the United States, the jobs are probably not going to come back because automation is going to replace many of these manual jobs. Now, that said, I do think that the United States may and should improve its manufacturing basis, its industrialization or reindustrialization, initiative. But trade is really not the culprit. China is not the culprit. The United States has been declining in its real productive sector since the 1950s. So that's way before China became a manufacturing powerhouse. So I think the U.S. really needs to get their own policies in order. They need to set their own house clean instead of blaming China for its own industrial decline. Now for China, I think I agree with one of the panelists that says there are many areas that China is willing to work with the United States. For example, fentanyl issues. China just, for example, tightened 2 precursor chemicals just last month. I think China is in the interest in helping the United States to fight these kinds of opioid crisis. At the same time, China is also willing to purchase more energies from the United States, especially from a very low base. When you look at China's imports of the 3 types of energies from the United States, it fell to 0 in June. So there's large room for China to make progress on those fronts that China is willing to work with the United States. But in terms of letting the United States dictate who China trade with and how China trade with, I think that's a sovereignty issue that China is not going to cave in.
Einar, I remember very well, the agriculture sector during last year's Import Expo, which is the largest expo in the world, import expo in the world in Shanghai. I remember talking to the associations of some of the agricultural products in the United States. They're talking about their concern. What if there's a change of government? What does that mean for their exports to China? Obviously, they are experiencing this turbulent time right now. So how much do you think these kind of negotiations would provide a more stability factor for both China and the United States? and also for the global market?
A lot depends on Donald Trump. As Manny was putting, one day it's one thought, the next it's another. If there's a phase 2 deal, this would involve China agreeing to buy energy and agriculture from the U.S. It could help the predictability for a lot of these farmers. It's something that they want. It would work for China because it's transactional. If Donald Trump breaks the agreement, they haven't put anything up front, they just stop buying. And I think it's going to lead towards that, but it's going to take a while.
Right. Meanwhile, we are also seeing a lot of other factors. It is not just about tariff. It's not just about trade. Trade now has so much impact on everything else and vice versa. For example, about technology, earlier we have seen China, United States put out their own AI action plans. One on Friday, one on Sunday. Quite interesting. If you compare notes, certainly there are very different approaches. One seek supremacy, the other say, let's provide the infrastructure for everybody to grow. So, but putting words aside, there are a lot of space for cooperation. Both sides understand this, and they have to cooperate. Well, the AGI is already a big part of the possibility. So to you, Mr. Gupta, while these trade negotiations are going on, how much they could create a good sense of cooperation, a good sense of basic level of trust, so that some of the really crucial factors can grow out of the at least somewhat positive feeling out of these negotiations?
You hit on a very important point out here, that being that if the trade negotiations succeed or are seen to be successful by both sides, this helps stabilize the relationship. Especially from China's perspective, there can be both leverage and an expectation that the United States is not going to deploy its export controls harshly against China, because the trade agreements and those managed purchases then might be withdrawn from the table. As we've seen, the trade negotiations itself has led to a stabilization in the technology competition arena so far. That having been said, your point is well taken. On AI and on, say, quantum, there is going to be extreme competition. It's about the terms on which they compete. And I'm actually, to some extent, heartened to see how the Trump administration is moving. It's trying to move more towards the direction of fairer competition, even though I know there will be export controls on chips going to China, et cetera, rather than the Biden administration, which was trying to do it in a very prescriptive and exclusionary way. Now, I think what the Chinese and the US side have to sit together is to see on things like AI in their policy area, things like AI and safety-related issues, that they can have a ground, so that there can be a basis, not just for a conversation, but for actual measures in this regard.
Thank you. Manny, your thoughts?
I concur completely. It's same thoughts. I think that when it comes to the technology area, that's that thorny issue area. That's the old saying in the last administration of a small yard and a high fence. That's going to be in that small yard and a high fence. And I don't think that we're going to make much progress on that. But one, I think, fig leaf that came recently is the NVIDIA is allowed now to sell the H20 chip. So, I mean, I think that is a good gesture in the right direction.
Of course, we all understand that's a watered-down version of what that specific company could provide. And of course, there's also a rising chip industry here in China and elsewhere in the world as we speak. But having said that, though, Yan, it's not just the tech sector, but also how different issues are coming out as a result of the current instability in global growth as well as in currency. We understand issues like a stable coin has created quite a stir in the global market because people are looking at this and thinking, this Genius Act, whether it means a synthetic, loop of the U.S. Forever leverage against everybody else. If the dollar doesn't work, then create something else, and then work the same, and the list goes on. But this is just one of those examples. So this credibility of whether the two largest economies could have a trade deal also is going to show whether there's sincerity of both sides, and probably even more for the United States to have or not about trying to put the world economy more on a stable foot rather than the other way around. But this is a question for you as an economist. I'm here all years. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think Donald Trump is putting American interests first, and I think more specifically is the financial interest first. So I think with stablecoin and all these other, trade issues, trade tensions, or technological restrictions, all of these are to advance, financial elites' interest. So I think China needs to take a very cautious approach when it comes to stablecoin. We all know this is not really a tokenized currency. It failed the stability, uniqueness, integrity, and so on and so forth to be a credible currency. It is a tokenized asset. It's a financial asset that's tokenized. So I think China needs to be very careful to set up, financial firewall and to really advance its own CBDC, which is the real centralized distributed ledger when it comes to digital currency. So I think, China needs to protect its own interest and instill a sense of stability to the global economy, because China is still a very, responsible stakeholder in all of these. So I think, China needs to play its stabilizing role despite whatever the United States is doing right now.
Right. Now, we only have less than 3 minutes to go, ladies and gentlemen. I would love to ask the last round of questions. We know both sides, hopefully, they're cool-headed entering into this negotiation. What do you think both can work together, at least to create some kind of census, show the rest of the world that the two largest economies can work together, but with mutual respect? Einar.
Phase 2 involving China agreeing to buy more energy and agriculture, some progress in terms of fentanyl and making sure that the precursors are not made in China, although they've shifted to other places.
All right. Go to you, Mr. Gupta.
Exactly as Einar said, managed purchase targets agreement done this fall in Beijing or Shanghai, and where the two presidents meet, and that becomes a foundation for this creation of other working groups and framework mechanisms to stabilize the relationship.
Right. Both of you have talked about China's commitment, if can be made. What about the U.S. side, Manny and Yan? But also, what you see as the most important to create consensus?
I think sector-specific agreements should come out of this meeting in Stockholm, especially in the safe area, safe zone of like agriculture. Energy purchases, I think, also can follow those two, and that's, I think, mutually beneficial. And then third is what I mentioned in the last show we did together, is getting the two presidents together. I think having them meet in October, as long as there's enough foundational things completed, I think they'll meet in October.
That precondition is important, as long as that the preconditions can be met. Having said that, though, to you, Yan, 30 seconds, less than.
Right. Well, I think the first two rounds to de-escalate the trade tensions, and this round is really to stabilize. So I'm hoping for more extensions, 3 more months for negotiations, and some goodwill gestures, for example, purchase agreements, as the guests have talked about. I think those are the best to hope for. I hope to see some fentanyl-related tariff to go down, but again, I think that would still be a pretty tricky point to achieve at this round.
All right, Yan, Manny, Saurabh, and Einar, thank you so much for joining us. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel, follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.